This is the 48th meeting of the Committee of Justice, and if everyone is content, even the ones on screen, if you're content that I declare the meeting open, if that's okay. Yeah, just before we do, can I just say that it's a pleasure to be here back again at the Justice Committee. I did chair the Justice Committee from 2016 to 2017 before the place fell down. It wasn't my fault, but it's good to be back. Good to be back. Okay, declare the meeting open to the public then. Can I just pay tribute? Can I just pay tribute then to the outgoing chair of this committee, Joanne Bunting, for the sterling work that Joanne did in that committee. Not to present myself as sad or anything, but I did tap in from time to time to the Justice Committee and seen how she operated as chair, and also seen firsthand how the committee functioned, which was very, very good and very, very professional. So I thank you all for your work in that and for assisting Joanne when she was chair of this committee, and we pay tribute to Joanne and the work, and we'll maybe get her a wee letter of that, if you don't mind. Can I advise members that the committee meeting will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online? Can I advise members and those in the public gallery that they are welcome to use mobile devices as long as they are in airplane mode and all devices are muted? Attendees can also connect to the Assembly Wi-Fi, and password details are available on the gallery rules. It is not permitted to take photographs or record any part of the meeting. Can I advise members that it's proposed that the oral evidence session with the Open University and youth workers on why Riot, addressing the whys beneath youth violence, will be recorded by Hansard and seek their agreement to this? All agreed?
Agreed.
Can I remind members that they are obliged to declare any financial or other relevant interests that might reasonably be thought by others to influence their approach to the matter under consideration? Any members who have interests to declare in relation to the day's business should do so now, or when the particular matter arises. Can I ask members, are there any interests to declare at this stage? Danny?
Yeah, I have an immediate family member who worked for the probation board.
Okay, Danny, thank you. Any other interests to declare? No. Okay, then we move on to agenda item number 1, apologies. We have received an apology from Daire Hargey. I've also received one from Morris Bradley. Can I ask members, are there any other apologies? Okay, can I advise members that committee members Doug Beattie and Danny Becker will be attending this meeting virtually? Agenda item number 2, draft minutes. Can I inform members that the draft minutes of the meeting held on Thursday, the 11th September 2025 are at pages 5 to 23 of the meeting pack? Can I ask members if they are content that the minutes are a true reflection of the proceedings of the meeting held on the 11th of September? If so, indicate. If so, I will sign the minutes. Are there any issues? No? Okay. Do you need... There we go. Agenda item number 3 then is matters arising. Lady Chief Justice Office consultation on media access to family courts pilot. Can I remind members that at last week's meeting they were asked to forward any comments they may wish to include in a committee response to the consultation on media access to family courts pilots being undertaken by the Lord Chief Justice's Office, or Lady Chief Justice's Office, to the committee office. Can I refer members to the draft response on pages 3 to 4 of the tabled pack, which reflects the comments made at last week's meeting and those received from Connie, which are also included in the tabled pack for members' information. Can I ask members if they are content that the draft response, with the draft response, or if they have any comment or suggested amendments? Are members content? If so, then could I seek agreement to issue the draft response to the Lady Chief Justice's Office? Content?
Content, yeah.
Okay, thank you. The Assembly and Executive Review Committee, review of Assembly Committee engagement of cross-cutting executive strategies. Can I remind members that at last week's meeting they were also asked to forward any comments they may wish to include in the committee's response on cross-cutting, on the ARC review of committee engagement on cross-cutting executive strategies. Can I refer members that as no comments were received, a draft has been prepared based on comments made on previous meetings. The draft can be found at pages 5 to 7 of the tabled pack. Can I ask members if they are content with the draft response, or are there any suggestions for amendments? If not, can I seek agreement then to issue the draft response? Agreed? Okay, agenda item number 4, learning from Why Riot, addressing the whys beneath youth violence, Open University and Youth Workers Oral Evidence. Can I refer members to pages 29 to 87 of the meeting pack for the relevant papers? Can I inform members that today the committee is receiving oral evidence from the Open University and researchers associated with the Learning from Why Riot research project? Can I welcome to the committee the following witnesses: John Darcy, Director of Open University in Ireland. Right, okay. And we don't have Stephen. So could I?
That's Stephen's here.
Oh.
One across the page, isn't it?
Right, okay. So can I welcome John Darcy, Director of Open University in Ireland, Gabi Kent, Open University Senior Knowledge Exchange Lecturer, Stephen Hughes, Learning with Why Riot Co-Researcher, St Peter's Youth Centre, and Daire Owens, very welcome here, replacing Colm Fanning. And that's all, I think, we have to introduce. So thank you very much for being here. Can I advise members that 3 other co-researchers are in attendance in the public gallery and may swap with those on the panel in order to answer specific questions. So you're all very welcome here to the Justice Committee. Wee bit of change with regards to me being here. This is my first meeting as chair of the Justice Committee, and I know you'll have known Joanne Bunting, the previous chair, and I know she was very interested in your research and your project. So without further ado, can I invite you to make an opening statement?
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, colleagues, and I'd like to thank you, Chair, and committee members for the opportunity to brief you on our Learning from Why Riot research project. The Open University has at its heart a mission to be open to people, places, methods and ideas, and since our establishment in 1969 we've worked with people and communities across Northern Ireland to make that mission a reality in order to benefit citizens wherever they live and wherever they work. Our impact, Chair, is greatest when we work in partnership. So, for example, we work with all 6 further education colleges, the Alliance for Lifelong Learning, the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, and many of the main employer organisations as well. The work we'll describe today is a unique project in which our partners, youth groups and young people have co-created the content, they've co-created the learning approach, and they've also done the research in a collaborative way with us to understand the impact that this programme has had on the lives of young people. Members will be aware that the Open University has a long history of working within the criminal justice system. For example, we are the prime provider of higher education within the Northern Ireland prison estate, and we support the role of lifelong learning to enable people to reach their full potential. The Open University also has a long history of working with communities that were deeply affected by the past and ongoing violence, where we believe that education can be an empowering tool for individuals as citizens and future peace builders and change makers. The Learning from Why Riot report centres around an educational intervention called Why Riot, and that was co-created by Dr. William Mitchell from the ACT Initiative and the Open University, initially working with 8 young men from the Shankill area in the aftermath of riots in 2021. The online resource that was the product of that collaboration is available on our Open Learn platform, and to date, Chair, that has been accessed by over 140,000 visitors since its creation, and currently there are 1,400 learners enrolled on that programme. Now, they're not just from Northern Ireland, they're from right across Great Britain, Ireland and further afield. In discussion with youth practitioners, many of whom are with us here today, we felt that from a practical point of view and from an experience point of view of our youth worker colleagues, that a face-to-face approach might be more appropriate given the challenges facing youth workers and youth groups of engaging with young people who might benefit most from a programme like this. So the research findings in the report offer insights into the ongoing impact of the legacy of violence on young people in Northern Ireland, but more importantly, effective ways of supporting the most marginalised young people through educational interventions. And of course, this aligns with our commitment to be open to all and our mission to deliver education that transforms lives. Chair, that's just a very brief overview from me to set the scene, but with your permission, I'll ask Gabi, Stephen and Daire to give you a little bit more detail about the programme before we take your questions.
Okay, no problem.
Gabi.
Thank you. Thanks, John. Yes, so we, as John outlined, I mean, we have this resource, and we know it had many, like 100,000 plus users online, but how might it be useful for the young people that we are originally trying to reach? And that's young people in communities that are affected by the history of violence and areas of multiple deprivation, and young people who weren't, for example, going to school or had disengaged from social services and every other connection. So we set up the Learning from Why Riot Action Research Project, which ran for 18 months. We had 5 partners, which included Education Authority, 2 Education Authority partners, NBAP and EBAP, and as a North Belfast area project and East Belfast area projects. We have Lagmore, and we have St Peter's Immaculata, and we also have alternatives in South Belfast. So it was a North, South, East, West Belfast collaboration. Intentionally bringing people from very different, diverse backgrounds and also methodologies and approaches to delivering youth work, because we wanted to understand how could Why Riot, which was created in the Shankill with young men from the Shankill, be used in other contexts? Could it be used in other contexts, and how? And then what outcomes and impacts might take place through the delivery for young people? And importantly, how do we measure that? And I think that's a really, really important point that sort of is central to our approach, really. So part of our co-design at the very beginning was to look at what do we measure as change? Like, what is the impact that we're looking at for these young people? And we sort of moved away from sort of short-term outcomes and any existing outcomes-based sort of evaluations. And we came up with a 10-point sort of what we call the Meaningful Change Framework, which actually looked at things like belonging, critical thinking, respect, including self-respect, aspirations, peer culture, safety, and attitudes to violence, not about measuring whether their engagement with violence ended, but what was their attitudes towards an understanding of violence. So these are quite sort of soft measures, you might argue, but that was our framework, and that was chosen because the youth workers felt that these were the points, these 10 indicators were what would give us a sense of the kinds of holistic change for those young people that would lead to longer term impacts in their lives and hopefully for their wider communities. So that's our starting point, is to just throw out what is, look very differently at this and think of what was needed and what experts on the ground felt was important to measure. So that's how we looked at measuring. And our evidence, as you hopefully will have seen from the report, I mean, the main, I suppose, headline really, which is confirming the work that's being done by people using public health approaches, for example, is that youth violence is, of course, a social and public health issue. It's not just a criminal justice issue. Underpinning it are issues of social and structural inequalities that are sort of prevalent across. They're sort of a key sort of driver in young people's behaviours, and really then we sort of looked at the other sort of drivers of youth violence that came out of the evidence, and unmet needs of young people was sort of a key issue, and that's sort of with things like emotional safety and belonging and so on, and alongside that was context of violence, and that sort of was driving young people's engagement in violence, which Stephen will speak to shortly because he is the expert on the ground. And we looked at also importantly what was effective, how Why Riot actually worked. And it works by fostering young people as thinkers and change makers. It enables young people to make their own decisions. It does that through a context of safety and security that's provided by delivering Why Riot in youth centres, in community-based locations by very, very skilled youth workers who do long meaningful work over time and who build relationships of trust with those young people. And it had the most impact. We had 5 different groups, 5 very different groups, 60 young people, 40 of whom completed. But the greatest trajectory in terms of travelling distance from where they started when we did a baseline to where they ended were I suppose, because they engaged the young people who were most marginalised at the outset. And these, as I say, are the kids who are at the interfaces. They had dropped out of school. They were struggling in many different areas. So it is an effective early interventional gateway program. It cannot solve everything because, as we say, youth violence is a social issue and it needs a broad, joined-up response. But it can make a significant transformative impact on young people's lives. And it does so, as I say, by addressing needs. I think that the other point I want to make really is that what we found through this research is there's a need for sort of this kind of long-term, flexible, responsive programs. And I say that because the longer, obviously, you engage with young people, the greater the impact. And we started this thinking it would be a 3 to 6 month research project, but we gave the youth workers the freedom to tell us what was needed. We were sort of a bit naive thinking it would be a short-term program because Why Riot is technically meant to take 12 weeks at maximum to do, or 12 sessions. It took between 3 and 12 months for people to deliver, and they delivered it because they came back to us eventually and said, we have to adapt to young people's needs. And they have different learning needs, and also we need a lot of time for these young people. So time is important, and Daire will pick up on that and why, and his own experience of that, and their work in Lagmore on that. And really the other point, which is key and which John mentioned as well, is the importance of frontline youth workers and outreach workers as youth development partners, not as emergency services, not as stepping in when there's things are at their acute stage. This evidence demonstrates the value of long-term developmental work through outreach, bringing young people in and then developing and supporting them over time and providing follow-on pathways. It's not a short process. It's not a quick fix. It needs time and it needs dedication and support. And the final point, which is going back to that notion of, again, youth violence is a broader issue. It's not a youth issue. It's a social issue. It needs a joined-up response. And I think one of our main recommendations was the co-creation, and I draw on our experience of working with our partners and the importance of starting with people who are experts in this context and co-creating a sort of a joined-up response in Northern Ireland here on how we want to tackle really the issue of youth violence and how to address it. So I'd like to now hand over to Stephen really to talk more broadly about the context of these young people.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Chair. Thanks very much for giving us this opportunity. I'm just a youth worker. I work in St Peter's and McAllister Youth Centre in the Lower Falls. I think our interest in becoming involved in this project was because what we see manifesting as violence in our young people, particularly at the moment along the interface, the Shankill Road interface, and also at Rise there at the Broadway and Village interface, was something that we had been trying to get a resolution to for a long time. And from the riots began in 2021, we had seen a consistent number of incidents. I think about 138 incidents last year on the North and West Belfast interface, and in our work with the police and local community groups and residents associations, we had sort of tried to find responses, effective responses to violence. But violence in Belfast needs to be understood, and I think this is one of the real specific benefits of what we found in the research, that although we have a legacy of political violence, there is ongoing social issues shaped by structural inequality. Theoretically, conflict theory highlights how historical divisions of power and resource entrenched into sectarian violence, while social identity theory explains how rigid group identities sustained mistrust and hostility. More recently, the public health perspective has framed violence as intergenerational, rooted in trauma poverty, segregation and exclusion, showing how our societal conditions can create environments where violence thrives. Socially, violence manifests itself in multiple ways. It's beyond sectarianism, it's beyond paramilitarism and community intimidation. It has acute challenges in relation to domestic and gender-based violence, as you are well aware. In the north here we have a huge femicide issue, and we have more than above average domestic violence rates that aren't being considered. But we also have systemic factors, and these are manifested in some of the violence that we see. Poverty, segregation is still a big issue. Social deprivation, unemployment, and remains concentrated in communities that have been mainly affected or significantly affected by the conflict legacy issues that have. And just to go off on a bit of a tangent, Carnegie came here in 1903. He was a Scottish industrialist, made a load of money in the United States. On his visit to Belfast, decided that he wanted to effect some change in the three most impoverished communities, and he built 3 libraries, opened in 1904. One of those libraries is in Donegal Road in the village, one of those is in the Lower Falls, and the other one was on the Old Park Road. 120 plus years later, we're still talking about social disadvantage, we're still talking about poverty. So there's structural issues that remain, systemic issues that remain a challenge for us. But I'm not going to, the report tells you all about violence. What I'm trying to do is trying to make this personal. And I want to talk about the young people that we engaged. Our work with William Mitchell to create this programme was a very inventive and a very creative way to respond to what was the violence in 2021. And it was a potential response, an intervention to the continuing violence, and it has proved to be very, very effective. And I just want to talk about the change in some of the young people. So the change for us was a specific targeted intervention by street workers. That these are detached youth work staff who are on the street and can see the numbers of young people and the key leaders who are involved in interface violence. So we created this targeted, very specific group of young people to be the people that we wanted to work with. These young people had disengaged with community, they were excluded, they were isolated, they hated their own community as a result. But what happened with this programme, and the research proves, is that something changed. We engaged them over a 2-year period. The difficulty for us was actually building the trust, actually getting the relationship with those young people. But what did happen? Suddenly, they stopped gathering on the interface. They had somewhere else to go. They had something else to do. They engaged in the workshops. They engaged in the conversation. And dialogical youth work is critical. You know, being able to have young people develop a trust, develop a relationship, and then progress through issues like identity, community responsibility, civics, all of those things. Was slow at times, but did eventually work. This is the impact. The impact is that violence reduced at that interface. Those young people ended getting involved in sectarian violence. The relationships across the divide were also very helpful. Every one of those young people, bar one, moved to a cross-community programme called the Ambassadors Programme with Townsend Street Youth Centre on the Shankill. That was an 18-month-long programme. They travelled together. They built relationships. Some relationships went beyond just friendships, you know. They got girlfriends and boyfriends. But what happened was attitudes changed, behaviour changed, new skills and knowledge. We ended up with young people re-engaging with school. One young person who had been excluded from school was re-engaged, he was mentored, he was supported, and completed his GCSEs last year. You know, we had others who went on to work. Granted, it was part-time, but they were in employment. But most importantly was the attitudinal change for us. The hate that they thought that they had to have suddenly dissipated. The understanding, the knowledge of what sectarianism was, what it was doing to our communities, what it was doing to the old age pensioners who lived around that interface was significant. And that changes the behaviour. Suddenly what we ended up with was a group of young people who moved through the leadership, two of which are now, we have a second contingent of Riot group now that we're working with at the moment, and two of those young people are involved in mentoring and supporting them. They all moved through to our Global Service Learning Programme and our leadership programme. They completed qualifications with the Youth Centre. So the movement happens, the progress happens, but I think the impact is that we have a changing citizen, and we have a changing response on the interface, and a changing understanding of what violence does to you personally as a young person, and what it does to your community. This report here has been absolutely huge in helping us understand that the longevity that's required in developing, delivering and assessing this work. But what it also done for us is that it gave us a different assessment tool. It gave us a different reporting tool. And that then supported what you now see as the Riot report. And every one of our groups who were involved in this research, and the peer researchers were all youth workers, some of which are sitting behind us here, has been, the change has been significant, but more importantly, it's now evidenced, and that's the success in this for yourselves. It's something that can be repeated and invested in the future.
Thank you.
Daire.
Yeah, so I think just off the back of what Stephen said, I think given this, it's clear to us that the approach to addressing youth violence must go beyond short-term fixes or reactive measures. What we need is sustained investment in both prevention and intervention. The first and perhaps most pressing recommendation from the Open University study is the need for long-term engagement. Youth problems are not to be solved in isolated interventions. They are individuals with complex lives that require consistent, ongoing support, whether it is through mentorship programs, employment schemes or emotional support networks. We must invest in developing lasting relationships with our young people that will navigate them to the challenges that they face. The research points to socioeconomic disparity, educational underachievement and systemic exclusion as key drivers of youth involvement in unrest. To truly make a difference, we must focus on addressing these root causes. Programs that provide educational support, vocational training and mental health services should be integrated into youth engagement efforts to give young people a sense of hope and opportunity. Another important recommendation is the need for community-based interventions. The Riot study emphasises that the best results come from the programs that are designed and led by the communities they serve. Local organisations, schools, law enforcement and community leaders must work together to create a unified approach that addresses not just the individual needs of the young people, but also the wider social factors that influence them. One of the most striking recommendations from the Riot study is the importance of involving youth in the solutions to the challenges they face. When young people are given agency and ownership over the programs that are designed for them, they are more likely to engage meaningfully and take responsibility for their actions. Involving young people in the creation and implementation of youth-centred interventions ensures that these programs are relevant, engaging and effective. The urgency of these recommendations cannot be overstated. The Open University's research shows that the current state of youth disillusionment and disconnection is reaching a critical point. Youth violence and unrest are not just an isolated problem, but a growing threat to social cohesion, stability and public safety. We are at a crossroads. If we fail to invest in long-term youth-focused interventions now, we risk the consequences of continual social fragmentation and instability. The emotional, economic and societal costs of reactive measures, such as policing and imprisonment, are much higher in the long term than the proactive, preventative work that the Riot programme recommends. Just to conclude, the YRAT programme findings from the Open University offer a clear path forward, a path that centres on long-term investment in youth engagement, community collaboration, and addressing the root cause of violence and social unrest. If we are to protect our young people and ensure a peaceful, just society, we must make a sustained commitment to supporting them. This is not just a matter of social responsibility, it is an investment in our collective future. I urge the committee to take the findings of the YRAT programme seriously and commit implementing the recommended strategies. Let us invest in the future of our youth, because when we invest in them, we invest in the future of our society.
Thank you, Daire. Thank you very much. Anybody else want to comment just before we go into questions?
Just to thank you, Chair and committee members. I know this was a slightly extended introduction to the report, but we certainly felt it was important to hear the voices of particularly Daire and Stephen in the impact. So we're very happy to take any questions committee members
Thank you,
may
and
have.
thank you for bringing your posse up. There's a whole lot of people in here, so thank you. I suppose first question, I know there's members who have indicated, but first question from me would be, where do you think why Riot has succeeded where your typical boxing coach and football manager has failed?
I think if we go back to the very start, we were approached by William Mitchell and also with Stephen about how to engage young people. And I think, Chair, that has been the secret of this. It hasn't been any sort of quick fix, or if you think back to Alex Ferguson, hairdryer treatments or anything like that. This was listening to young people about what would make a difference for them. So the very first part of the course was developed by the 8 young men working closely with William. And I think that co-creation from the very earliest stages, and we've taken our time with this particular programme, although we got great access in terms of the online usage of it very, very quickly. When we started to work with the 5 groups, with Stephen and colleagues and Daire, we took our time in terms of trying to embed it with those well-established youth groups, and they took the time to reach those young people. And I think, Stephen, that probably was the longest part of the journey for yourselves.
It really was.
People.
And to come back to your point, Chair, that all of those organisations that you mentioned all do sterling work and are all involved in, and have clearly significant outcomes, whether it be in health or social and life skills, or even in pure diversionary understanding, like keeping them occupied. The young people that are involved in a lot of the interface and the groups of young people that we engaged for this research weren't those young people. They were the young people who were most isolated, who were most excluded, who were most vulnerable, and easily caught by almost, I'll not say recreational responses, because it wasn't recreational. There was a definite political agenda to some of what they were doing, but it was a response and a manifestation of that isolation and that vulnerability that those young people had. So it's not the young people. This programme didn't engage young people who were already involved in positive and developmental opportunities. It targeted young people who were consistently on the interface, who were consistently involved in social unrest, and who were violent on occasion. So that's the difference. The difference was it was a very targeted intervention. It was a specialist intervention for not just because our job in youth work is not to be an emergency response. The reason why youth workers become involved in these situations is about contextual safeguarding. It's about keeping young people and communities safe. It's about ensuring that those young people don't damage each other and don't damage the communities that this happens in.
The outcomes were assessed using the Meaningful Change framework. Can you explain to me exactly what that is, the nuts and bolts of it? And then can I also ask, do you think that the longer term objectives are robust enough to withstand a catastrophic event which triggers rioting in certain areas?
And I just wanted to just pick up on the first point about what's different about this as well. And just at the centre of this is critical thinking. You know, we are, you know, we and dialogue and using dialogic processes. But a sports programme, other programmes, they're really important to engage young people. But what we're doing is nurturing thinkers and to give people the choice to make independent decisions. We're not saying don't riot. We're saying know why you're doing what you're doing. and make a choice for your own self, your independent choice, and particularly in a context where there's social media influences and lots of external negative influences in young people's lives, and there's a lot of noise. We're giving them the tools and the skills alongside a structured program which provides safety, meets their needs, but we're giving them the skills so that they themselves can make choices and become future leaders themselves and thinkers. So that's the thing, you're investing in young people as thinkers. We're not doing something to young people, we're enabling young people to make choices for themselves. So I think that's kind of what's different about this. You asked about the meaningful change framework. Sorry, could you repeat that?
Just the outcomes were assessed using the meaningful change network or framework. What is that? What's the nuts and bolts of that framework, and how is it? And how does the whole scheme? Is it going to be robust enough when a catastrophic event takes place, which will entice people out onto the streets? I suppose is two parts of that question.
Yeah, I mean, in a second, we don't know, but I might hand back for some thoughts on the longer term impact to Stephen and Daire. But well, I was just going to say the framework first. I would say it's in evolution. We're in the process of actually making it a more replicable, usable tool beyond our project, our initial project now. So it's watch the space, I'd say, partly on that. But at the moment it has 10 indicators, which, as I say, are things like critical thinking, belonging, attitudes to violence, aspirations, confidence in education and learning, and measures that go from very low to high along a spectrum. And we looked at all of the data in each location, and then we did a standardized kind of process so we could actually measure. It's a tool that kind of gives you a baseline of where young people are at, and then you can kind of see the progress over time. Its robustness, as I say, it's in development. And we will definitely come back to love to report at a future date on how it can be used when it's fully formed. But I'd love to hand over to Stephen and
mine's is a much simpler response, Chair. In youth services and in community development, there's always been a difficulty in evidencing growth, whether it be in attitude or knowledge or skills, but it's also a challenge in terms of what the longer term impacts of that are. And I know a lot of government agencies use outcome based accountability, and that's super. But what change does it actually affect in communities, in the people, and in the place? That's particularly for us in where I am in Lower Falls and Lower Shankill, on those interfaces. And the rigidity of the research was able to provide us with both diagrammatically visuals to show the young people's movement, and that for us was different. It was so much different that we've actually adopted that now into our youth work quality assurance systems within the organisation, and we are in the process of sharing that with the field. That's where we're going in this. So it's not just an academic exercise. It actually affects change and helps us to reassess what we need to do with the next group. Do you know what's the benefit? What positive change has this affected? And I think that's probably as simple as I can describe it.
You're affecting people's lives, young lives, and you're providing a better future for those young lives. How best and how better could the executive help you in that environment?
I think there's a couple of issues. We see this as a tool, as a mechanism to intervene in social unrest. It's proven as a quality technique. It has proven its impact. It's just getting the government agencies on board. Do you know? And it's not just about a response to social unrest and interface violence. It's about progress in communities. It's about enhancing the lives and opportunities of children and young people, in communities that have very serious and complex barriers.
Poverty, inequalities, deprivation, which all leads to the environment where young people feel let down and feel forgotten and alone. All of that environment changing could help your work incredibly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
What communication have you had with government agencies?
We're actually in a process right now of trying to develop that recommendation, which was about co-creating a joined-up response, and we're hoping to kickstart a series of conversations, co-creation conversations, to actually look at what a model here in Northern Ireland of a violence reduction, non-violence, peace stroke hub that brings people together, that isn't just focused on interventions, short-term interventions, but also brings together those cross-sectoral issues like structural inequalities and social inequalities. So we've had some interest, for example, with some support from the Victims of Crime Commissioner, and we've been in conversations with some other people, and we would love the support of the committee and on this as we try and push these conversations forward to get something concrete out of this process. I would say that on a high level, and on a lower level, I'd say we just were talking this morning about, Northern Ireland's a wonderful testing ground for lots of ideas, but it's not always the best at embedding and rolling out and scaling. And I think there's, how can when there's interventions like this, how can we support youth workers to be able to do this rather than doing it in a piecemeal, trying to, Stephen's running another Why Riot group. I met them last night, amazing young people. They're not even at the point where they're ready to start the course. But you're doing that in between bits and pieces and cobbling together tiny bits of funding here and there just to make it happen because it works. It shouldn't be like that. There should be the support to say, and UV Group, you mentioned that as well, who you could do this work with. You don't have the funding. Yeah. Long-term, 2-year funding. Yes, go ahead. There's an issue here. You can work with these young people. You have the time to adjust to their needs. Carry on. It's that kind of like, how do we get a program like this where youth workers can deliver it, where there's need? Sorry.
There's lots of little pockets of really great work that's been taking place. In St Peter's, we've been using non-violence for many, many years. Farset Inter-Community Group up between the Shankill and Springfield Road are delivering on non-violence as a hub. Others, I think of the Youth Justice's strategic plan. They're taking boys seriously stuff at Ulster. Obviously, Siobhan McAllister's work in human rights and the tackling violence against young women and girls. TBUC, Peace Plus. There's all of these pieces that are all sort of out there, but almost in silos. Mm-hmm. One of the big asks for us, and I know Adele Brown from the Department of Justice has been an ambassador for this for many, many years. It's how do we bring all this together? How do we tackle all of the interpersonal issues, all of the community-based and contextual stuff? Like the Youth Work Alliance recently produced a paper on contextual safeguarding around social unrest, which was a really, really impactful way of looking at it. But what we're hoping and selling to the committee is we need something that brings this together. And that there is, we've taken groups out to Glasgow and to Rotherham, to Cardiff and other places to look at modelling this. And I think we can create something different. I think we can create something better. And I know, and I'm sure you can speak to this, John, about the research that you have taken in terms of reviewing those.
Yeah, certainly as a UK-wide and Ireland-wide organisation, Open University has seen what's happened in Scotland in particular. And I think there are models there, Chair, that we could bring in here, but the innovation that Stephen and others have co-created here is a model that could be exported outside Northern Ireland as well. In answer to your question, I think it is that joining up piece. We've been very encouraged by the response we've had from MLS so far. We launched the report a couple of months ago, and your predecessor, Joanne, came up to us afterward and said, you need to be in front of the Justice Committee. I know we've got the Education Committee next week, and we have the Executive Committee in due course, and we're having a conversation with the Education Authority. So we're keen to share the findings here. I think it's a good compliment that people like Stephen talk about the robustness of this research. It is very different, and it's taken over a longer time period, because these young people are very special in terms of needing that extra nudge, that extra encouragement to start a course, because they've maybe had a bad experience at school or whatever. So I think the encouragement from this committee, Chair, will be essential to us in having other conversations, but it is about joining things up. I think that's a key thing.
Okay, I'm going to open up the members. Danny's on the screen.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report and all the work you're doing. I suppose I should declare and interested. I've worked with many of those in front of me here on the streets of Belfast and seen the great work that they've done. And particularly going back to the riots of 2021, where many of the youth workers that were standing there as volunteers. They weren't being paid to be there. Many of them, they were there and reacting to a situation that was arising, and they didn't want to see young people have criminal records or anybody getting hurt. And if it wasn't for them, being very truthful, that event could have really escalated. I suppose this leads me into my question they asked, and maybe Stephen could pick up this one, would be, is the funding, you've already sort of touched on it, but the current funding that youth workers and clubs have to apply for, particularly the community and voluntary sector, is it fit for purpose, really, when it comes to these hard to reach kids? Because you need to get them and be on the street to engage with them. And has the EA moved away from that type of interactions and restricting youth workers in that regard?
There is a changing funding environment with youth organisations at the moment that some may say is an evolution just of how organisations or government agencies fund groups. We have a tendering process now. We have specifications. We have Northern Ireland tendering systems online. All of those systems are probably evolution of political systems, but for us on the ground, it has changed things. For example, we have a couple of organisations across the communities: Daire, Londonderry, West Belfast, North Belfast, Portadown, Lurgan, North Down, where Hughes fund, the Department of Justice fund through Department of Education, through the Education Authority down to us. Hughes fund the TPP, or the now called the EPOC programme. Hughes funded a piece of work called Engage through the Education Authority. Worked with, in West Belfast where I was, it worked with almost 100 young people who were either under threat from paramilitary organisations or who had been abused or violated with paramilitary attacks. This year, Department of Justice has removed 2/3 of that. And we now have one staff member who's left in West Belfast to work with those young people. Projects have been closed down in Lurgan and Daire, Londonderry, and other places as a result of those funding cuts. So that has changed some things. One big significant issue, Danny, has been the change in the Education Authority's funding away from street-based work. Street-based work, to me, is an absolutely critical intervention in the most isolated young people. I have, like every youth centre, have a load of 100 young people who come and engage and benefit from youth services. That's not what street work's about. Street work's about getting out to and reaching into young people who are not engaged. And that's what has worked really, really well. That change in funding environment has implications in communities, and it's. I have concerns that this movement away from specifically targeted interventions for the most, like I was saying, sure, those who are not engaged, those who are most isolated, most vulnerable, and who have the most complex issues, are going to be lost in this system. And what we're saving here, we'll pay for somewhere else. If I can just give you an example, in West Belfast, the numbers of young people who are being incarcerated are down significantly over the last 10 years. And that's a significant saving to the Department of Justice in terms of incarceration rates, justice rates, policing costs, all of those things. If we're taking away the preventative and the reactionary services that are there, then you are going to pay for it in some other way in the future. But more importantly for us as youth workers, what we end up with is young people with more complex barriers and very tight limits on their potential in the future.
Thank you. And I suppose it leads to my next point around those great programmes that were and are no longer there. And I'll be a bit parochial because it's West Belfast and I would know it. But we had a very good detached team that worked for a number of years and had really significant good outcomes and evidence-based. And for me, it was a small pot of money in the grand scheme of things. It was a couple £100,000. I can't remember exactly what it was. But once that was cut, a Hughes feeling that impact like across West Belfast, the loss of that, because I always remember you could pick up the phone and there'd be someone there, and I'm not saying that they had to be used as an emergency response, but there was that early intervention from that young people could trust, those who are hard to reach. You can't get into maybe a youth club or maybe out of school, but they would very much listen to a youth worker before they would listen to a police officer. And like if I look at my own community, it may not be interfaces where I represent, like it might be part of the world, but just very recently, it was youth workers by pure chance, and one of them is sitting there, picked up on young people arranging a fight through social media, and it would have had a sectarian element to it because it was going to be two kids from two different communities, and very quickly we could have created an interface in a place that never had an interface before. So it's just how do we then use this great work that you're doing to make that case for we need that interventions, we need that attached work to be happening and funded as part of all of this.
The parapathetic team that you're talking about, Danny, was closed on a Friday night. It cost £150,000 a year to run this team of 5 people. Holy Trinity had lead for it in West Belfast. And on the Saturday, it closed on the Friday night, and on the Saturday night, there was £60,000 worth of damage done to TransLink facilities on the road. And that's, to me, is the most obvious sort of reference to what happens whenever we don't have those services there. And Danny, back to your point about interface issues, a lot of what we see on the interfaces is he kissed my girl, or he texted my mate, or he put it up to me. There's a lot of toxic masculinity, a lot of machoism that is normal with growing up. The police don't want to put a young person into the justice system. They want something that is a developmental and educational response. And to be fair, the Chief Inspector in West Belfast will tell you that youth services save her £40,000 a month. So there's clear consequences in terms of budgets, but there's also very significant consequences in terms of communities and the lives of our children and young people. And I think that's where we come from. I know you have fiscal responsibilities as well, but yeah, it does. It can be very, very helpful. This.
One last wee point, Chair, and I'll be me done because I can pick up. You send in Education Committee next week, so I think I'll follow up on some of that the model that's being taken up from the Education Authority. I suppose my last point would just be the raise in racism. Almost it's going to not say replace sectarianism, but it's building along throughout communities. And I'm just trying to gauge where's our young people in this, because if I look at social media, it is older ones that are being involved in sort of driving this information. I'm just wondering how vulnerable are some of our hard to reach kids are falling into this in parts of Belfast and further afield. Sorry.
Stephen, do you want to take that?
No, I'm happy. Danny, theoretically, this power, oppression and discrimination is the underlying theory that embeds in all of this. What we're seeing in terms of the manifestations of violence is all in this report. I think this report articulates how the Why Riot methodology can help young people. This self-awareness, this critical self-reflection, the taking of responsibility, not just for your own decision making, but what sort of a community you want in the future. That this proves that this methodology can be used in a variety of situations, and I think it's challenging. Don't get me wrong. As a youth worker, we're having to be more analytical. We're having to be more insightful, but more importantly, we're giving the young people the ownership over their communities. And when you give young people that and enable them, and they suddenly realise they have that power, the decision-making changes, the attitude changes, and so does the behaviour.
Okay, Danny?
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Just before I bring Connie in, I'm mindful that there are other people in the audience here that may want to contribute to some of the answers. So if you do feel, don't feel constricted or restricted in any way. Come up, there's a spare chair there. And John, I suppose I'll point to you as to who you think best placed to answer the questions, if that's
sure,
okay.
that's very kind of you. Thank you.
Connie?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for coming in today, and especially really impressed by the work on the ground of the youth workers. And I think what I was going to ask isn't a million miles away from the point Danny just made. And I know this report came on the back of riots in 2021 at Interfaces, but riots we've seen over the last year or two, across Ireland and the UK, has had a different element when it comes to racial motivation. And are you finding that when you talk to young people about that, you can use this methodology and it still applies? And I'm interested to hear that you've gone across to other parts of the UK to talk to people and youth workers there to see how this could be used, if a bit more information on that.
The fact that we have more people accessing the course online from outside Northern Ireland, I think, is a testament to I suppose, the generic value of the conversations that it enables youth workers to have with young people, Connie. We need to take that further as a university, and we need to take it further across the jurisdictions of the United Kingdom, I think, as well. We'll maybe hand over to either Gabi or Stephen to get into the specifics. Sorry, Daire.
Yeah, no, just on what you were saying about, how applicable actually is this programme in terms of racism. I think it goes back to what we said before about this programme is about empowering young people around critical thinking. A lot of this work is single identity work. It's with young people all from one religious background or ethnic background or community background. And again, it's about providing them with the tools to actually, think before they make these actionable decisions or, get themselves into this real trouble. And I think it could work in a racial context. I definitely do. And I think I've seen it with some of the young people that we've worked with. This isn't about, the programme isn't just about green and orange. It's about the decisions the young people make and their ability to, actually make up their own mind and not just follow the herd.
I mean, I think, and I was just going to say, I think it's exactly. I think it's translatable and transferable to other contexts, and that, as you say, it's critical thinking, and it's also exploring different perspectives. These are sort of classic teaching tools, and also, I must make a reference back to William Mitchell again, and kind of the co-creation of this. But it is about this kind of community-based critical thinking and education from the ground up, and learning how to do dialogue and so on. But one thing that struck me in the research, and I remember talking again, I think Stephen with your group particularly, is about empathy. And I think that when you described, and Geraldine, who's the youth worker as well in St. Peter's, described the young people at the beginning as not having empathy. And in fact, you mentioned this too. It's about lighting fires to feel the heat.
Yep.
And I think that again is transferable.
Repeat that again, sorry.
Lighting fires to feel the heat, really, that because there's a lack of empathy, there's an anger and there's a frustration. And part of this process is actually if young people themselves feel valued and understood and seen, their anger that is just going outside gets constructively challenged because they feel differently about themselves, and then maybe because I think that I think that the core issues can be addressed for young people in any context. It's not sectarian, as you say. These are young people's issues, young people growing up with in contexts and cultures of violence, and without the skills and the abilities to navigate that. And a part of this process is to give them this.
All of this is manifested in more systemic issues, and I think it's that social marginalisation, the isolation, the poverty, the cross-cutting theme of poverty are everywhere. They are everywhere. The young people that are involved in some of these interface issues and some of the ethnic violence as well are young people who don't have an understanding of what their responsibilities are, who they are in terms of identity, what this is supposed to be. And we've been finding for many years, especially in the interfaces areas, all too often young people just want to be together. But when they gather, and I think Danny made reference to this earlier, when they gather on the interface, suddenly it becomes sectarian. Now, we've had 138 incidents, or 168 incidents last year. I think out of those, a small number of them were sectarian. But when you help the young people talk through how it looks and what responsibilities they have, etc., it'll be the same with ethnic violence. Once you get the young people to understand and take responsibility for the decision making and help them with that dialogical process to work through those issues, suddenly things change.
Just to ask, following up on that, Chair, thank you. I think something that comes to my mind, I'm really interested to know as youth workers, what you find most challenging when you're actually delivering this course. And I think some of the things I've been quite alarmed at when I've seen the most recent riots is obviously social media. We have this live streamed, and I think a lot of young people, a lot of people who aren't young as well, went out to see what was going on, maybe got pulled into something, especially young people who are, more at risk of behaving in a way and taking risks than older people are. And I think as well, some reports I found absolutely horrendous after the riots where some parents were taking their young people and their kids to a riot. And, I think as youth workers, you could be delivering amazing programmes and talk to them about brilliant things, but if their parent takes them out to a riot, that's really, really difficult for you to challenge.
Yeah, and I think, just to go back to your question of, what is the most difficult part? And I think the most difficult part is that it's getting them in through the door. It's getting them to actually agree to sit down and have that conversation and open the space then for, the dialogue and conversation in that learning. And what I think, and credit the Open University, where this programme differs is it goes back to that long-term funding. This programme gives the time for the youth workers on the street, to engage these young people on a weekly basis. That might start with a hello, 1 week, you might get a conversation by week 3, and it was the same when we were working with our group, in a local park. It took weeks for us just to be able to get them to go, we'll sit down and have a conversation with you. It took, us bringing pizzas up to the park, do you want a slice of pizza, and we'll have a conversation. And then that then led into the YRAP programme and the course after weeks of engagement. And I think that is the most difficult part of this. It is having the patience and having the time within current structures to actually engage young people on a week-to-week basis over the period of, as Gabi said, and Stephen, up to 24 months. It's
patience, I think, is the most difficult thing, and knowing that there's so many external influences on the young people. But yeah, just take the time, and I think it's one of the frustrations in youth work and in funding, as Danny asked earlier, is they want things done in a 12-week programme or a 6-week programme or a summer programme. We need to understand when we're talking about complex, vulnerable, frustrated young people, we just need to be patient. So we do.
Colm stepped up. Come on ahead, Colm.
Thank you. Apologies, I have a chest infection, which is why I'm not jumping to the front. But I think one of the most difficult, and sorry, in relation to your earlier point, I think this programme is well suited. No matter, we went into so many different issues when we were working with Riot. We had all young men. We were looking at it from an intra-community conflict. So these were young men that weren't even on an interface. So we talk about the sectarianism and how it impacted there. The project we were working with in Danny's constituency was young men that were involved in intra-community. They were attacking buses. They were attacking their own community infrastructure. But once we get into that engagement process, after that long-term 3 months of constant engagement to try and even get them in through the door, we were up against a multitude of different issues that these young men were facing. They were talking about gender-based violence. They were talking about what influences them in terms of social media, and those things that they're constantly getting bombarded with, And one of the biggest things that shocked me was the young men's attitudes towards ethnic minorities and the rise of ethnic minorities within this community. And we were saying, well, within our community, we haven't got a huge, but again, it goes back to those other issues that young people are facing about defence of their communities. What is my role? Is my role to step up? So we had that opportunity to talk to those young. What are you here? What do you do? What is your role within your community? What is your community to you? What does it say about you as young people? And then for them, like a massive thing was with our young men. I'm sorry, I snipped out for a second, but Daire might have mentioned it. Our young men were talking about how the media betrays them, always negative. So one of the processes that we went through in this programme was about looking at what does the media say about young people in your particular community. And they actually found it took them 4 years of going back through information before they got a positive news story about young men in their particular area. And they were shocked by that. And it was at the very end of that programme that they said, we want to continue this on, but we want to call our new programme The Usual Suspects. And they were saying, because we are normally called The Usual Suspects, and they actually went about at the end of this programme looking to change and put out a positive media, a positive news story about young men in their particular area. So we looked at ethnic minorities, and we looked at gender-based violence, we looked at inter-community conflict. This programme really stretches the boundary and goes, the thing is, because it's structured, but it's also open for young people to actually come in conversation. So we had conversations about the real things that were affecting them at that time. And it does go down to a broad range of topics depending on what those young people are involved in or what they're looking at. So I think this programme is really adaptable. It's really adaptable in terms of the race riots that are taking place. And I think it will continue in terms of being able to impact community groups across the UK in terms of how they can really have an impact in terms of young people and looking at the major issues that are affecting them in their community.
No, thank you.
Eamon, you want to come in now, or you want to hold your powder dry?
No, I'm okay to come in.
Okay.
Just on reiterating some of the stuff that's already been talked about, but it's also understanding that youth work is one of the core elements of youth work is voluntary participation, and that young people choose what they want to be involved in and what they don't. And I think it was one of the things that we really enjoyed in working with Open University was the flexibility and the adaptability of the programme and being able to meet the needs of young people and not just doing a programme to meet an outcome. There wasn't that tokenistic element, but having that meaningful change that could change the trajectory of the young people's lives going forward. And I think one of the really unique parts with our group is that not all of our group did go on to complete the programme, but it also allowed us to be able to assess the needs of that young person and provide an alternative method that would better suit that young person. But I think in terms of meeting other needs that are out there, it's not just YRAD. The YRAD program, the foundation of it, allowed us a program that helps the young person question, why me, why my family, why my community, and therefore changing what way they think till a more critical element until their decision making process.
Very good. Thanks, Colm.
Good, thank you.
Patsy, thanks very much for your patience. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks very much, all of you, for your very valuable work, which is clear here today. Can I ask one thing? And I was looking through the report just because it has been there in the past. Any external, you touched briefly on external influences, Stephen. It has been mentioned, we read reports about it in some of the newspapers. It has happened in the past in our history where manipulative extremist organisations have used people as young people, especially vulnerable young people, as cannon fodder and put them out there, and they're the ones who are left with the criminal record or the jail sentence. Did you establish any evidence of that? Because clearly it's being reported in the newspapers. And how to get people extricated from that influence if it does exist. And it has been touched upon here today as the influences of or the growth in racism, because it's not just interface riots that are happening. We've seen that, and we've seen it right across the world. The growth of racism, the growth of hatred of anybody who's different or perceived to be different, or maybe I should say portrayed to be different, is a better way. So how do you see yourselves maybe broadening your work into that area, and how that could be benefit ourselves, and maybe even if it creates precedent for other areas? I heard the speaker talking about this morning over in Britain, the growth of racism, the growth of extremism, and I heard it on talk back there today, all these things that are going on across the world, and the malevolent influence of social media. If you have any ideas around that, I would be most welcome, because that seems to be one of the things that I see regularly and that kicks people off, and it's propaganda, but it is having a deeply malicious and malevolent influence on people. And one final thing, I was intrigued there to see, I think it was the South Belfast group, the use of NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. I would definitely be interested to see where that's going, or how that's, I've read a wee bit about that, so I'd be intrigued to see what way that's been used as well, please.
If I can just step into the first bit of the question, if you don't mind, I think we're in a changing world at the moment, and I think that clickbait, the idea, the influence of social media, being as outlandish as it possibly can be to get likes, because there is profit to be made there. It's the biggest influence on our children and young people's lives at the moment, and it's totally not regulated. They get access to everything and anything they want, and depending on which social media platform they're using, the algorithm will decide what information they get. It's a very, very difficult situation. One good thing that came out of this report and this research is the dialogical approach. It's being able to sit in a safe space, and this is a critical part of the process. Sit in a safe space to allow young people to have those conversations. And all too often, when they work through what's actually happened to them, how they're being exploited, how the social media world, that, to be fair, I'm 60 coming, I don't understand it, and I try my best to stay away from it, but our children and young people live on it. And I mean the amount of time they're spent. We do an exercise in the process where we ask them to open their phones, and there's a place in your phone where it tells you how many hours per day you spend on social media. Some young people were spending 15 hours a day. And that's your whole waking day spent on social media. Do you know? And to be fair, there's a lot of young people out there that are getting messages and information with no one challenging them, no one enabling them to have those conversations, those very difficult conversations, and for their wee minds to process through that. And then throwing into that the developmental issues of a teenager working through what is supposed to be positive masculinity and toxicity and all those things. The process is sound if we use it properly and we enable young people in a safe space to have those conversations, Patsy, and it proves to work. The problem is there's not enough of it happening.
Then any manipulative external social groups or paramilitary groups or
everybody
extremist groups trying to use these young people.
Everybody will try and use young people. You can see it all the time. Do you know, and it's one of the big things that youth work stands up for. Stop exploiting, stop using, stop violating young people. We will always fight that corner on behalf of young people.
They're still at it, that's what you're saying. Mm-hmm. Okay. Anyone else? Maybe the NLP? No?
Well, I'll pick up a couple of things. So on the social media, I think Stephen's exactly right. Like, it's the space that you could talk about it, but also within the course, in the second module of the course, there's a lot around social media that gives young people tools like to understand filter bubbles, like to understand that they're fed information that's targeted and that repeats the same ideas in this little bubble. So there's tools there. And it was, when I think about, for example, in East Belfast, there's a really nice example where the youth worker there, Scott, talks about how that then enabled them to actually talk about the young people themselves and their own social media use, and how they'd been actually kind of caught up in an issue, in a fight that was based on lies and misinformation. So it's kind of landing that kind of real world experience. And the other thing, and I don't know if Colm would want to talk about that as well, but in terms of the influences generally, external influences, again, a theme to come out is from our research across all of the groups was that kind of tension for young people between who they are and who they feel they ought to be in relation to their communities, or in relation to media, or in relation to their peers and other people's expectations, and that kind of who I am, who I ought to be. Getting to the kernel of who I am is kind of what this course is about, and shoring up those young people's sense of their self and their own identity, and then again that's that being able to make their own decisions. I can go on NLP, and then I don't know if Colm wanted to talk about that.
Well, just like in terms of us, we've seen that influence from a social media perspective. In terms of the young men we were working with, there was two influential social media influencers that were really toxic in terms of the content that they were putting out. But these young men were thriving and thought that they were aspiring to that. And it was only through this process that there was a little bit of challenge and thought put into, well, what impact does that have on the people that are around them? And the young people then started questioning themselves and questioning the influencers. But again, that's only a small section of young men, particularly around male gender roles, you know. And those young men, actually, by the end of it, actually were questioning. Actually, I never really thought about it that way, you know. But it was only through the process of this. Another thing I wanted to just jump in on as well. I think one of the other big parts of the Y Riot is obviously what we've delivered, but also what we've delivered is a much broader community. So there was an evidence cafe built in where we had statutory agencies, we had community organisations, we had youth workers on the ground, and we had from TEO right down, you know, sitting at a table for an entire day looking at these particular issues and actually listening to each other's perspectives in terms of how do we best impact. So I think it was a massive result in terms of even that evidence cafe, in terms of how different organisations, whether it be the Youth Justice Agency, the Executive Office, are actually hearing from youth workers on the ground, and for youth workers hearing from a strategic perspective at Stormont. How do we see the same thing but in different eyes, and trying to get an understanding of each other's world? And I think that would be a massive learning coming out, that I think that needs to happen more. So it needs to come from the top right down to the ground, and both actually sitting in the same room and learning from each other and trying to develop up change.
The neuro-linguistic programming is used by it's one of the normal tools in youth work that we would use a lot. It just depends on the needs of the group, and you'll use it. Now I know Brian used it. He's a senior practitioner in South Belfast. He used it with his group, but a lot of youth workers use NLP.
But it's not a methodology that
But
is
it's not
certainly in this
no.
course. Our
No.
course, the methodology is dialogue, reflection, critical thinking. But that we gave people the freedom to bring in or add or whatever their methods that they also like to use, and that happened to be a method that youth worker liked to use there. It's not what this program does in general, but that, you know, it's up to people how they, to a certain degree. But the whole program is much more focused around reflection, dialogue, critical thinking.
Then the point about racism and the growth in racism, how do you feel if what you're doing could be adapted, tweaked to help at least mitigate some of the problems and the fractious issues and the downright hatred that's bubbling over against people who just happen to come to another country to live?
It's for us, it's about contextual safeguarding. It's about ensuring that young people are kept safe and kept away from being sucked into any sort of violence. And it's the cross-cutting theme for us in this, and it comes clear in the report, is that why violence manifests itself. And the piece is always education. The response is always enable the young people to work through it themselves. And you do find they change if the methodology is right. And we've got it right with us.
Yeah. I think it is that their long-term investment in an intervention program, that if we're talking about some of the most excluded and socially isolated young people who are very mistrusting, particularly of adults, if we're able to provide a safe environment for them that they feel comfortable enough to be able to explore themselves, explore the community around them, explore where them opinions and thoughts are coming from. I think that allows them to be able to think more critically and able to think further down the line of how this impacts not just Eamons, but when we're talking about developing empathy and developing compassion in our young people and changing the mindset.
I don't mean to sound sexist, but we have to understand the context to the developmental stage, our stages of development for young people. Our young women mature much more quickly and make better decisions and are more compassionate, caring, thoughtful. They assess risk differently from young men, and I'm sorry about this, but the data.
Give me head.
Right, the young men, we're a bit slower till this, and that's where we need to focus some of this to help them through and get them through those developmental stages with the least impact on themselves and others. Sorry, I hope that didn't come across bad.
You think we've got a full house of members here wanting to ask you questions, so can I ask you just to be tighter with your answers? I'd be much obliged. We have a full house here of people wanting to ask the questions. Ciara, thank you very much for your patience.
Oh, thank you. And I'll declare an interest because 25 years ago, running some other programmes, whether it was through Wider Horizons, IFI programmes, quite similar in nature, but they were golden tickets for a small cohort of young people because it's always short-term funding. Plus the fact there's very little investment in the research element of it, so at a grassroots it's quite difficult to be able to. So congratulations and that relationship with the Open University, and I think the title's fantastic too. It's so catchy, and being able to bring this report to the table. So well done. Next steps, and I'm conscious there's other areas because I know a lot of fantastic work that our youth organisations and our community organisations are doing, quite similar projects, but they're one-off things. They're quite short-term, and it's so difficult to get long-term funding because you need long-term investment. But where I suppose it's the next steps of over the years, similar projects. We know what works. There is toolkits. How do we? How valuable? And I know how valuable our youth workers on the ground because it has to come bottom up. How do we finally get across the environmental approach to actually focus on not so much, don't get me wrong, all young people should have a universal youth service, but how do we switch for the 80-90% that aren't attending youth centres? And then that cohort of most vulnerable young people in our heart of a community that our PSNI can identify, our housing associations identify, our teachers can identify, and we done that. We brought a collaborative through our IFA, we brought all the agencies around the table on the lists, and we had 70 young people, and there was only places for 20, and it was a golden ticket for 2-year programme, and it was amazing. But it didn't have such an integral layout of modules and stuff, which is, how do we finally get across the environmental approach and redirect investment where it needs to go? So that's the first question. I don't have the answer, but that's the first question. And then secondly, and measuring success is critically important. The social return on the investment is particularly that perks up any department's ears. So I'm wondering, is there any work being done on that? And then finally, thirdly, I get a lot of our programmes were as a reaction to riots that happened in Daire, and that's where you're able to get core funding for 2 years. But see, 6-7 years later, it's the young children, the brothers and sisters, the younger. We were just faced with the same thing again, and then you're trying to chase funding again. So it is more. There is a lot of early intervention work. I know this is from 13 up, but there's loads of early intervention work going on there. So it's really. I'm probably rambling a wee bit now because I'm really passionate about it, and I like everything that you say. Look, I get it, but I'm frustrated where on the ground our youth workers, our community workers and all are doing amazing work, but it's small cohorts of young people, and it's so hard to get long-term investment. Tackling paramilitaries, I know I ran a programme through that, and it's continuing to run from my previous job. Good work again, but it's a small cohort of 10 people in an area where there's probably 70 or 80 people that need this programme. How do we do it? That's the answer. What can we do maybe as a committee? And
I think there is some things that maybe I'm hoping that you know about. There is some work that's being done between the regional voluntary organisations. That John Lynch from the Youth Work Alliance has been leading some work in redesigning with the Education Authority what youth services should do and how it should do it. And I know the Regional Youth Development Plan came out yesterday, and there's been some really positive pieces in that about how they bring agencies together. I know there has been an interagency body that has been brought together, and I know Adele Brown in the Department of Justice has been a great lead and a great visionary in how to connect the dots. I think it's a resource, and it's always coming back to resources.
But that's the same thing 30 years, and we know how critically important, even more so now than ever before. And the only other thing that hasn't been raised today is what I'm finding when I'm out with the youth workers, criminal gangs and drugs. That's the most scary. That's where our youth workers don't even know the individuals that are hanging around the communities now. Before, they knew the individuals, they knew the families, so it was easier to start building relationships. But that's a real worrying trend, and I do not know.
We have county lines here.
You know, so that's another level again, and that's increasing. So unless there's the intervention of what you are talking about here today, and there's sustained long-term investment in it, that's only going to get worse. So it's just to make that point.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just
go on ahead?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this touches on again conversations we were having this morning about the sort of the joined up response. I mean, it's we hear this, what you're saying, we you know, and the siloed sort of thinking and trying to get people to work across departments and across sectors, and getting the support across the sectors to tackle this as a complex issue. But I'm hopeful, and I think that your support, you know, again, your support on these what we maybe call co-creation conversations about a joined up response. That's what we're trying to kickstart in later this year, and we certainly be talking to the DOJ about that, and Adele Brown and people like that who are doing this amazing work in this department. But there's people doing amazing work in other departments, and there's a siloing. And what we're trying to do is open up a space where people can actually talk to each other. And what is needed here will, we hope, come out of that. But then it needs, as you say, it needs the commitment, it needs the funding, it needs the leadership to make this happen. So I think it's a process, but having your support would help us along the way. I think that's where we're at.
I just mentioned just as well, I think it's critically important, Department of Health and family support and early intervention at a family level is critical. They support that overall, but just a note.
Okay, Doug Beattie on the screen. Thanks for your patience.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Can I just say, I think it's a fantastic discussion. I think it's a fantastic programme, and thank you all very much for what you've done. I think it's absolutely incredible. I want to explore something slightly different, because it's at times it feels a little bit Belfast centric, or maybe not Belfast centric, but heavily populated urban areas centric, whereas elsewhere it could be different, and even within those areas it can be slightly different. I think Danny raised a really good point about interfaces being created inter-community with people falling out with each other. I think that's important. Well, I'm from Upper Ban, so Portadown, Craigavon, Lurgan and Banbridge, and it's very different from us in that area. It's not interface type violence. It's more young people coming together, alcohol and drugs, and that turning into youth violence. So how do we scale up the program so that it understands the different areas and the different needs that we're going to have in different areas? I know you're talking about this is critical thinking, and and getting people to explore those areas in themselves. And the second point, because I want to give you it all now so we can get finished reasonably quickly. Look, I'm a youth. When I was knocking about in the late 70s and I was doing recreational riding, that's what it was. What's the difference between that then and where we are today? Is it still just recreational riding? But one of the things I found was when I left school at the age of 16 was that if you were going down the university route, you were seen as a success. Yet if you didn't go down the university route, which I didn't, you felt a little bit abandoned. And when you felt abandoned, you were more inclined to be dragged into that antisocial behaviour or youth violence or moving in those circles that will create youth violence. So that's kind of a context I'm sort of asking is, what do we think we can do to try and address that societal vision that if you don't go to university, you're nearly abandoned? which isn't true everywhere, of course, but and also how do we look to scale up the program to take into account what's happening in other places which isn't heavily populated urban areas?
Thanks very much, Doug. They're really good questions. In terms of the first one, you're absolutely right. This was a pilot, and it was largely within the Greater Belfast area. But we have been trying to work together. We put in a bid to Peace Plus to have a much more region-wide experience. Unfortunately, we just missed the funding. That the project was valued and fundable, but there wasn't enough money in the pot to do that. But we're continuing to look at opportunities to do that, and that's why today's engagement with yourselves, next week's engagement with the Education Committee, we hope to get the ball rolling in terms of having a much more Northern Ireland-wide response. And I think the other point you make about how the general public and indeed ourselves perceive pathways, whether it's GCSEs, A-levels, university, job, hopefully is the one and only route for many people. I think that's a much wider discussion that we need to take forward as citizens in what we hope to be a thriving society, and it's valuing the different routes and pathways that people take. And I guess that might come up at our discussions with the Education Committee next week. But Gabi, maybe I have a hand over to you in terms of the wider reach. You've had some very good conversations with groups across Northern Ireland, and there is a willingness, I think, to take these learnings.
Yeah, I mean, I think also
there.
It's not just in Northern Ireland. I mean, again, we look in the other nations as well. I mean, and it goes back to the earlier point about it not just being sectarian either, for example, as an issue. I think. Yes, I mean, in terms of how to scale it out, it's the same question about funding and embedding ideas rather than just sort of piloting. But I think we haven't yet done it outside of Belfast in terms of this way, but we would love to, and we'd love to find partners who would do that with us. But we just haven't been able to thus far. I'd say the other thing that hasn't come up, but it's just something that came out of the research and is really important, I think, as a point to make in terms of supporting this. It's not just supporting the programme to deliver to young people, it's supporting the practitioners who deliver the programme. And we talked a lot about communities of practice, and that being something that was essential, because you have youth workers working, whether it's Belfast, whether it's Daire, whether it's in rural areas, as you say, if they're dealing with delivering this programme, there's a wonderful opportunity to share information and to understand emerging issues and emerging themes, like Colm mentioned, sort of rising racism and xenophobia. That was happening in all 5 of the areas. We only kind of picked up that it was happening in all 5 areas towards the end of the research, because it was a gentle bubbling conversation, because we're if you begin to create a community of practice for people who are delivering this and are given the training and support based on what we have learned works, what's most effective, because not every approach is effective. That was the point of the research, to understand where and why and what was effective. So if we have a training program to support people delivering, and we have a community of practice to support them sharing knowledge and information in the delivery, urban, rural, wherever, I think that you'd also develop a picture of emerging issues that would help real-time responses to. But it's not really, I don't know if it quite directly answered your question, and I don't know if anyone else had an input on that.
I think it does, and I think what I'm really kind of getting at is that there's other influences at play here, and we've talked about poverty and deprivation, and look, I see it often, but we also see that younger age, which is alcohol abuse and drug abuse as well. And that takes them down a particular path. And if you combine that with somebody telling them at school, "Oh, you're not going to university. You're now going down a pathway which is going to be seen as a failure," you can see how we're setting children up to fail. And the other point then is, does this program need to be delivered at an earlier age so that they understand that as they get older?
I think. Sorry, Doug. I think it's definitely something that is person-centred, it's public health-led, it's place-based, and it can happen with, I would probably say, 11 plus. To me, this is a secondary school programme. There could be an option on bringing it as a almost like a non-violence response into primary schools. But at this stage, we haven't put any effort into making that happen. But I do see your vision there, and I think it's something that maybe we'll continue to explore as we go forward.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Brilliant. Well done, everybody.
I was going to say, I agree with Stephen. I think it could be brought in to the world of the secondary school in terms of LLW. From an early age when they're starting, you know, into the secondary school age, could be something that's adopted quite easily for LLW subjects. But again, maybe it's something we could look at with the Education Committee going forward also.
Would it lose effect if it was in the curriculum?
It would be a very different.
Yeah, it's a very different.
I think it might need a bit.
It's the intentionality of the most.
Yeah.
But
But the other
engaging the
thing
most
that we are
vulnerable.
looking at is also doing an endorsed OCN out, so that it actually moves beyond being just by right, but it actually gives people something in terms of.
Because I'm sure some of these children don't go to school or didn't attend school. Stephen, last but not least,
thank you,
thanks for
Chair.
your
Thank you,
patience.
folks, and good to see you again, John, as well. Just a couple of points in terms of engagement with PSNI, both throughout the process and post the review, maybe at a senior level and so on with the PSNI. Is there any updates around that or anything you can?
I'm happy to speak to that. Yeah, throughout our whole process of the 2 years of delivery and at present with our second cohort, yes, we will engage with the not just the local chief but also with the neighbourhood teams. We like Eamon and Geraldine, our street staff are out there on the ground. We'll be speaking to the teams regularly. We don't just do the proactive education and developmental learning that's in this process. We also do response, because all too often we're reworking between Lower Shankill and Lower Falls. When it kicks off, it becomes, because of those walls, it becomes sectarian. And I have to say this, the majority of times this is not sectarian when this violence erupts. So getting in there, and the police understand that, and they don't want to be putting hundreds of kids through the youth justice system. They'll be on the phone and go, Stephen, what can we do here? And we'll get staff to respond. Ruth responds on the Shankill end in Townsend Street, and we'll respond in the nationalist communities end. And we normally get a response. And if I can tell you a story, Stephen, the two staff had a phone call from the police one night. So there's 40 of them in Townsend Street, blah, blah, blah. This was before the summer. And when the staff responded, they had lit a fire. But when the staff engaged from both sides, what we found was, yes, it was a large group, there was a fire, but it was a social situation. The wrong thing that they done was light the fire. Do you know, all too often, if a police engagement goes in there, it becomes something different. And I think that's why we've been so impactful in terms of our street work, because we don't need a policing response in that situation. We need a developmental response. We need an opportunity to bring those young people together as a good relations programme or inclusion programme or cross-community project, whatever. So that working with the police in this, it's essential for us.
Yeah, and I think the police do very much value that partnership approach. You know, they recognise it could be
counterproductive. We have had numerous occasions where police have responded but have got there. We have been on the ground and they have been able to step back and let us go in and engage with the young people. And at the end of that, it turns out that police aren't needed. The situation is totally de-escalated, but it's understanding that not all young people here at interfaces are there they're at, and that young people do have the right to socialise, but within a safe space.
And I think it touches upon some of the other members earlier mentioned it really, that Riot thing, it can become a bit of a spectator attraction, and I think that is where social media has brought it into people's homes, and you see it globally. You can see things instantly, and even in recent days and it's the counterproductive of that as well, isn't it? The curiosity.
We've also been pretty successful with the police support to be able to close down some of the chat rooms that the young people have on Snapchat and other social media sites, because that's how they gather. The Belfast group has over 3,000 young people now.
And something can be organised within minutes, and seen by thousands. Just the final question really for whoever wants to answer it, I suppose, what was the most alarming finding through the research from people with yourselves that are experienced in terms of why Riot?
For me, it was the hurt and pain that kids are feeling. I think when we were working through the process, you were beginning to hear shame, guilt, embarrassment, frustration, anger. there's a lot of pain in our group, yeah.
Yeah, I think for our young men, it was definitely the way people in the community viewed them.
Post riot, you mean? That's what you're referring? You mean?
Yeah. So for us, we were in an intra-community, but they were looked down upon by the community, or they felt they were looked down upon by the community, and so they felt that disconnect from the community, and we knew that, you know. But then for them to articulate that they wanted to change that, view of the community looking at them like that, you know, because that's what they were feeling as they were coming to this programme is, well, nobody gives a crap about us anyway, you know, and so that sort of impactful learning from them to be able to articulate, we want people's attitudes to change about us, you know, and then for the same time then saying, well, what do you need to do in terms of your behaviour to affect that change, you know. So that was the big thing for us. Would you agree? Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if it would be so much alarming, but very disheartening to hear when some of the young people were talking about and getting to the core reasons of why they riot, and talking about their first engagements with being with other young people from the other side of the community was engagements that was bricks and stuff getting through over a wall, and how from such a young age that's had such a lasting impact on how they still view people from the other side of the community.
If I could just finish on a positive as well, one of the successes of this process with Open University for us, and I'm speaking very personally here, was that we undertook a graduation event. Now, it was a proper graduation event. We got them gowned and we done it all proper. It was one of the mothers who said to me, my son achieved nothing in school. And this is a mother of quite a vulnerable young man, sort of 16, tough young lad. And she said, my son achieved nothing, but to get that photograph and to hear him coming back and speaking so proudly. This is a kid that doesn't have a lot of esteem and self-worth, but he spoke to his mum so proudly that she felt the need to ring, do you know, which I found absolutely wonderful. It was one of the proudest moments of the process for me. But the celebration event at the end, the graduation event, was huge, and it's huge because it was young people who weren't going to be all too often unachievers, and it worked an absolute treat. So.
And I would like to echo that in terms of the positive. I know it's really hard. There is, there's a lot of very difficult. I think the corrosive impact of violence. I was quite astounded by just how that shaped young people's lives so deeply, and how all pervasive it is in concentrated areas, and the impact of poverty and so on. But in terms of the joy of this, I mean, that was such a joyful event, and I think that the potential to actually make a difference to me was wonderful to be in this process and to see the work that was being done, and to see that it is possible to make an impact. And I've learned a lot from extraordinary youth workers, but also that change is possible.
Yeah. We also have to give credit to the 8 kids from the Boys Model School.
Yes.
Those 8 young people, with William Mitchell's help, took this idea and created this programme. Do you know? And all too often, the kids are, they get a bad name, but these young lads, young Stephen in particular, who was leading on this, and I would love to have been here today to get the credit for it. His work and his wee peer group led this and drove it and tortured people to make it happen. Boys Model School, the principal at the Boys Model School, for allowing the process to happen. Absolutely superb, because the impact has been way beyond the school and the community.
Very good. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you very much for your attendance here today. I hope this has been very worthwhile for you. I know that the members of the committee here, and I have taken a lot out of it. And to me, it's about the centre, the person being in the centre of this all, no matter what the context, no matter what the environment, it was the person. And it's about the responsibility and where they see themselves being placed in their environment. So thank you very much. Thank you. And I wish you all the best next week in the Education Committee too.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
All the best
Good
now.
to see you again, sir.
Okay, folks, we will push on because we are struggling for time. That was a full house of questions there, so thank you very much for your patience. Agenda item number 5 then is the Justice Bill written papers, legal services paper. On the Justice Bill follow-up queries, can I refer members to pages 89 to 91 of the meeting pack, which contains legal advice from the Northern Ireland Assembly Legal Service Advice, which follows up on queries raised by members in relation to the Justice Bill during various briefings before the summer recess period. Can I just remind members that as ever the advice is privileged and restricted and should not be discussed openly in public session. Can I inform members that the clerk has liaised with the legal advisor regarding the serious organised crime aspect at paragraph 15 on pages 93. So can I seek members' agreement to request more information from the Department of Justice as outlined in paragraph 6 on pages 92 and paragraphs 13 and 14 on pages 93. Is that agreed? Agreed. Item 5.2, Justice Bill request for further information table. Refer members to pages 94 to 125 of the meeting pack for the document prepared by the committee team to track committee requests and responses received in respect of the Justice Bill. Can I seek members' agreement to note the list of requests and responses? Agreed. Can I inform members that the bill folder has been updated to include all recent papers received and will be issued to members shortly, and of course I'll have a lot of reading to do to catch up with you guys on that Justice Bill. Agenda item number 6 then is SR 2025/137. The planning fees deemed planning application and appeals amendment regulations Northern Ireland 2025. Can I refer members to pages 126 to 149 for the relevant papers? Remind members that at the meeting on the 19th of June the committee agreed it was content with the proposal for a statutory rule to amend the planning fees deemed planning applications and appeals regulations Northern Ireland 2015 to increase the fees payable in relation to applications and appeals to the Planning Appeals Commission. The fees replicate the planning fees charged by local councils and the Department of Infrastructure and prescribed in the Planning Fees Regulations Northern Ireland 2015. The Department advises that PAC fees have not been updated since 2015, despite 3 amendments of the DFI planning fees, which was an approximate increase of around 19% since 2019. Can I inform members that the rule was laid on the 23rd of July 2025 and came into operation on the 23rd of August and is subject to the negative resolution procedure. The examiner of statutory rules raised no concerns regarding the technical aspects of the statutory rule in her report dated the 15th September. Can I advise members that the department has confirmed that there have been no changes to the policy content of the rule since the proposal was considered by this committee? Can I ask members if they are content with the statutory rule? If they are content, then I'll put the question that the Committee for Justice has considered SR 2025/137, the planning fees deemed planning applications and appeals amendment regulations Northern Ireland 2025, and has no objection to the rule. Agreed? Agenda item number 7 then is Department of Justice retention and disposal schedule. Can I refer members to pages 150 to 231 of the meeting pack and to pages 9 to 12 of the tabled pack for the relevant papers? Can I remind members that at last week's meeting on the 11th of September, the committee considered the Department of Justice retention and disposal schedule, which was laid with the Business Office on the 3rd of July. The schedule is required to be laid before the Northern Ireland Assembly under section 8.2 of the Public Records Act Northern Ireland 1923 and in accordance with the rules of the Disposal and Documents Order 1925 by the Public Records Office of Northern Ireland PRONI. Can I inform members that the retention and disposal schedule is subject to the negative resolution procedure? The statutory period will end on the 7th of October 2025. So can I remind members that in considering the schedule at last week's meeting, the committee agreed to ask the Department of Justice to highlight how the schedule differs from the previous version. The committee also agreed to seek more information on the Memorandum of Understanding from within the Ministry of Defence and why the records of item 10.14 of the schedule was managed in this way. Can I inform members that the Department's response is included in the tabled pack? Can I ask members if they are content with the Department of Justice retention and disposal scheme? Or are there any comments to be made at this time? Can I seek members' agreement to inform the Committee for Communities of their decision on this matter, as Prony falls under the policy responsible for the Department of Communities? Members content? Okay, content. Item agenda number 8 then is the Prisoner Ombudsman for Northern Ireland retention and disposal schedule. I refer members to pages 232 to 251 of the meeting pack for the relevant papers. Can I inform members that the Prisoner Ombudsman for Northern Ireland retention and disposal schedule is required to be laid before the Northern Ireland Assembly under Section 8.2 of the Public Records Act, Northern Ireland 1923, and in accordance with the rules of the Disposal of Documents Order 1925 by the Public Records Office of Northern Ireland. Can I inform members that the retention and disposal schedule is subject to negative resolution procedure, and the statutory period will end on the 13th of October 2025. So can I ask members if they wish to consider asking the Prisoner Ombudsman for Northern Ireland to detail how the schedule differs from the previous version, or if any other information or clarification is required?
Content to
okay. Content to ask that.
Yep.
The Prisoner Ombudsman. Can I ask members then if they are always content with the schedule, or if they wish to postpone their decision until any information requested has been received? If the committee has taken the decision today, then we will put the question, but if you want to hold off until we get that information, I'm content with that. Yeah, hold off.
Keen to hold off, yeah.
Okay. Okay, item agenda number 9 then is the Aarhus Convention. Call for evidence, summary of responses, Department of Justice written paper. I refer members to pages 252 to 278 of the meeting pack, which provides an update from the Department following the call of evidence on access to justice in relation to the Aarhus Committee, as well as a summary of responses to the call for evidence. Can I remind members that at the meeting on the 5th of June 2025, which does seem like a long time ago, the committee considered an update from the Department to the Aarhus Convention Compliance Committee, ACCC, which outlines the outcome of the call for evidence as well as proposals for changes to the costs protection regime in relation to Aarhus, claims that the Department intends to take forward concerning recommendations in decision 7/8S. In relation to other issues raised by the ACCC concerning cross-undertakings for damages and judicial review time limits, the Department has concluded that there is insufficient evidence of a systematic problem to justify a change at this time. However, the Department advised that this will be kept under review. So can I inform members that the Department has highlighted that last month the ACCC published a draft report concerning compliance by the UK with the decisions around 7/8S. Whilst welcoming the progress to date, the ACCC finds that the UK has still not met the requirements of that decision. With regard to the access to justice issues raised in relation to Northern Ireland, the ACCC welcomes the progress made though considers that the proposal in relation to the type of claims covered by the cost protection regime does not go far enough, and that reliance on judicial discretion means that both the current legislative provision on cross-undertakings for damages in Aarhus claims and the current rule in relation to when time starts running for the purposes of an application for judicial review are not sufficiently contained to meet the requirements of the Convention. So can I advise members that the Department intends to publish the summary of responses to the call of evidence, which notes the update provided to the ACCC in May and the ACCC's draft report. The Department will consider the final report of the ACCC and the decision of the meeting of the parties in due course. So can I ask members if they are content to note the paper and if any further information or clarification is required at this time? Content to note? Great. Agenda item number 10 then is the Domestic Abuse and Civil Proceedings Act, Northern Ireland 2021, the annual Domestic Abuse Training Statement, Department of Justice written paper. This is something I had an interest in when I was last on this committee. Refer members to pages 279 to 285 of the meeting pack for the relevant papers. Can I inform members that under Section 32 of the Domestic Abuse and Civil Proceedings Act Northern Ireland 2021, the Department of Justice is required to publish an annual training statement outlining the uptake of training across PSNI, the Public Prosecution Service and Northern Ireland Courts and the Tribunal Service and other relevant statutory bodies. Can I advise members that the Department has issued the Committee with a copy of its latest draft training statement, which sets out training that has been carried out by the PSNI, PPS, the Courts and Tribunal Service and other relevant statutory bodies between the 1st of August 24 and the 31st of July 25, and provides an update on completion rates against the Domestic Abuse e-learning package, the Domestic Abuse / Context and Change. The Department also advises that it is working with Women's Aid to produce a more easily accessible, shorter and refreshed version of the e-learning package to encourage wider uptake. Can I advise members that the Justice Minister intends to publish a training statement on the Department's website this month? So can I ask members if they are content to note the training statement or if any further information or clarification is required? Ciara, come in.
I was just content to know, but I think we're all quite clear. I would like to note the concern regarding the NI Civil Service drastic numbers, going from over 2,000 the year before down to 125. So it'll be interesting to note maybe what actions are being taken to try and improve on them figures in particular.
We asked the department that question.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else want to come in on the back of Ciara? Sorry, Doug, I see your hand up.
Yeah, Chair, thank you. The Northern Ireland Courts and Tribunal Service hasn't really given us how many has done it. I see no information there. They talk about them having done it before it became legislation in 2021, but there's no figures there. All the others, and as Cara points out, the Northern Ireland Civil Service was very poor, but all the other departments have sort of given us a figure of how many have done it, but not the Courts and Tribunal Service. I'm not sure I'd be content to sign off on this until I see the level of uptake from that department.
Okay, we can go back to them and ask that question.
I suppose it's a sustainability element of it as well. The time out investment, there is a cost to it, so as applicable, that's how is it going to be sustainable as well? Maybe it's another question to add in.
Remember the time when this was been debated in the bill, there was that issue around the judiciary, the criminal justice element compared to the other bodies. But to be honest with you, the law is the law. It was a clause within the bill, and so I think that all organisations should be abiding by it, and I think that they should come with the full spirit of that clause, and we should get as much information we possibly can. So thank you very much, Ciara and Doug, for that. We will write back to the department. Do we have to write back to the court?
No, we'll do it through the department, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much then. Agenda item number 11 then is Safer Communities / Organised Crime, update on strategic approach, Department of Justice written paper. Can I refer members to pages 286 to 332 of the meeting pack? Remind members that at its meeting on the 30th of January 2025, the committee considered proposals by the department on a new strategic approach to tackling serious and organised crime and the review of the organised crime task force structures and governance arrangements. Can I remind members that the department advised that in order to ensure sufficient time to establish the correct structures and processes and to secure partner buy-in to fully embed a new way of working, it was necessary to develop a further one-year organised crime action plan for 2025-26. Can I inform members that the department has now issued the committee with a paper providing members with detail on end-of-year delivery against the 24-25 organised crime addendum action plan and a copy of the agreed organised crime action plan for 25-26. Can I inform members that the department advises that over the coming months it intends to finalise and consult with colleagues, partners and stakeholders on the proposals for revised arrangements and the draft shared measurements framework. It also plans to lead work on a number of key actions contained in the 25-26 action plan. So can I inform members that the department has asked the committee to note the update on the wider strategic approach to safer communities, the end of year position for the organised crime strategy addendum work plan 24-25 and the organised crime action plan for 25-26, and the committee will be kept updated as this work develops in the coming months. So can I ask members if they are content to note the papers or if any further information or clarification is required at this stage? I think this is one we just keep an eye on, keep a constant pressure on to see what takes place and what happens. Okay, sorry, Ciara, come in.
Just one note, I suppose, it costs. So I'd be interested to know, obviously, yes, continue to monitor against the targets and stuff, but what cost is associated with this plan? And are the full funds in place for this? Or will be a case that actions won't be delivered, just to get some idea from the department where they're at and the deliverability of the plan?
Yeah. So deliverability and then also the costs.
Cost, yeah.
And maybe even maybe even ask the question about the costs as it's being not delayed, but it's been elongated now, and maybe the difference in costs with the new approach, with the more lengthened approach. Are members content then? Okay. Any further comments? No. Okay then. Agenda item number 12, Strategic Framework for Youth Justice, the Annual Progress Report and Updated Action Plan, Department of Justice written paper. Can I refer members to pages 303 to 332 of the meeting pack for the relevant papers? Can I advise members that the Department has advised that the third annual report detailing progress made to deliver on the Department's Strategic Framework for Youth Justice is due to be published. Inform members that the framework was published in March 2022 with a 5-year lifespan and provides a context for how the youth justice system has developed and improved in recent years, highlights the key milestones along the way and sets a vision for the future of a progressive youth justice system delivering better outcomes for children and communities. Can I advise members that the Department has provided a copy of the third annual report covering work taken forward over the 24-25 financial year, as well as the action plan for 25-26, which has been revised to reflect the current work status and new actions. Can I ask members if they are content to note the paper or if they require any further information or clarification at this stage? Ciara?
I think it would be excellent if we could get them in to actually present on it.
Okay.
Because I feel it's easier to have it animated through having conversations of exactly the work that they are doing and maybe any challenges that they are facing and deliverability of any areas, and it's only through having them here presenting to the committee that we can ask them questions, if that would be appropriate, or if members are content for that to.
You guys know the forward work programme better than I do at this stage, so if you think there's room there to slot in, then yeah, I'm happy enough for that approach. Any other members want to comment? Are they agreeable to that? Yeah, okay. Moving on then, agenda item number 13 is correspondence. Can I inform members that there is a correspondence memo and 4 items of correspondence at pages 333 to 456, and a further memo and 1 item of correspondence at pages 14 and 15 of the tabled pack. Can I advise members that I will draw their attention to 2 of the items, and they will then have an opportunity to comment on any of the other items of correspondence which they have a particular interest. Can I refer you to item 13.4, pages 388 to 445 of the meeting pack, which contains continued correspondence from an individual in relation to a personal issue. Members will note that a memo in relation to this ongoing correspondence has been prepared by the clerk at pages 388 to 391 of the meeting pack. Can I remind members that the committee has considered extensive correspondence from this individual on a number of previous occasions. A number of responses have been issued to inform the individual of the committee's strategic policy and legislative role in relation to justice matters, and that it does not get involved in individual complaints, and advised that she may wish to engage with political representatives or seek other administrative or legal remedies that may be available. Can I remind members that, as advised at the meeting on the 3rd of July, advice has been sought with regards to the best approach in dealing with this continuous correspondence. Based on that advice, a response has been drafted, which is at page 390 of the meeting pack. The response reiterates the committee's role and advises that no further responses will be issued unless it is in relation to new matters that have not been previously considered and which relate to the committee's role. Can I seek members' agreement that the draft response at page 390 is issued to the individual, and that no further responses will be issued to any further correspondence received from the individual unless it is clear that the issues raised in them fall within the scope of the committee's work. Can I seek members' agreement? Okay, agreed. Can I advise members that under Standing Order 46.8 all documents received by the clerk must be provided to the committee. Therefore, any further correspondence received will be included in members' packs for noting only, unless new information is provided. Okay, content to move on, members?
Yeah.
Item then, number 13.5. Can I advise members that the committee has been copied into correspondence from Protective Mothers NI to a number of other organisations, which begins at page 446 of the meeting pack. Can I remind members that the committee agreed to discuss some of the matters raised in the correspondence during next week's planning meeting? And if members are content then to shelve it to them? Content with that? Can I ask members then whether they are content to note the other items of correspondence as set out in the correspondence memo, or whether they have any comments to make on any of them? Members content?
Content, yeah.
Okay. Item agenda then number 14, Forward Work Programme. Can I advise members that the Department's proposed Forward Work Programme is at pages 458 to 459 of the meeting pack? Can I remind members that the Department has written to the committee to request that the oral evidence session with the Permanent Secretary be rescheduled until after he meets with the Criminal Justice Board in late September. I take it members are content with that. It'll be okay. Yep. Is there anyone? Inform members that the Department has now advised that due to diary commitments and recess, the Permanent Secretary will not be available to give oral evidence until the meeting of the 6th of November 2025. Can I seek members' agreement to schedule the oral evidence session with the Permanent Secretary for that meeting of Thursday 6th November and to schedule the other items of business as set out in the Department's Forward Work Programme? Members agreed?
Agreed, yeah.
Can I ask members, advise members then that the draft committee Forward Work Programme is at pages 460 to 466 of the meeting pack? Can I seek members' agreement to both Forward Work Programme subject to any changes as agreed during today's meeting? Agreed. So agenda item number 15 then, Chairperson's Business. NICCY's International Children's Day event, 20th of November 2025 at Stormont. Can I refer members to page 468? I'll get this up in front of me too. 468. This contains an invitation from the youth panel of the Northern Ireland Commissioner for Children and Young People to an event for young people celebrating International Children's Day at the Long Gallery on the 20th of November 2025. And I inform members that the youth panel will be exploring key issues and launch their own report on the state of children's rights in Northern Ireland. Concurrent with the wider event, the Commissioner is aiming to deliver a session 11:30am to 12:30pm aiming to promote children and young people's participation by showcasing local examples of good practice. Can I advise members that they have invited me as Chair of the Justice Committee to deliver a short presentation along with other stakeholders in the public sector on engaging with children and young people and hearing their voices as part of the working practice. And I seek members' agreement for me to attend the session and deliver a short presentation in the capacity as Chair of this Justice Committee. Members agreed? Okay, thank you, members. Agenda item number 6. Any other business? Can I ask members whether they have any other business at this time they want to raise? No. Can I just pay tribute then, if no other member wants to come in, to pay tribute to Stephen, who's leaving us? I've joined the committee and Stephen's leaving the committee.
Not related.
That's just to do with the reshuffle. These things happen. But just to say thank you, Stephen, for the dedication you've shown this committee alongside Joanne when she was chair, and for all the work that you've done and for being a member and a good part of the team here.
Thank you, Chair, and wish you well for the time ahead.
You'll be good to know that you'll not have to study.
All the best as well. We wish you all the best.
Thank the team here as well. They was very dedicated and looking after us as well. Thank you.
Thank you. You'll not have to worry about the justice bill anymore.
I know.
Although I'm sure you'll tap into it.
Yes.
Okay, agenda item number 17 then is date, time and place of next meeting. And I advise members that next meeting of the committees will be the strategic planning meeting and will take place on Thursday the 26th of September at 2 p.m. in room 106. Note the change, members, room 106. I don't want you drifting around the building looking for us. So room 106.
Thank you, Chair.
And can I advise members that papers will be issued to members in advance of the planning meeting? If there's no other business, then I'm going to declare the meeting adjourned. Thank you very much. Thank you.